Amen. You know, you can kind of gauge a person's excitement by their character and their demeanor. And some people don't display excitement to the degree that some of us may, but I'm telling you something. These are the most exciting days that we're living in, I believe, in creation, because we're going to see the fulfillment of his promise to his people in the days ahead of us. And so, having said that, I'm so glad you're here for this Shabbat. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon to Remnant Manna United. There's some things that Abba has been revealing to us as a corporate body here locally on the Pacific Northwest, and I'm sure to a lot of you as well. In particular, our friends at Covenant Calendar, we're just so grateful for the relationship we have for them, and we stand united with them because we believe that Abba is revealing some stuff to us that will enable us to be overcomers in the days ahead. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, I am an overcomer. Well, everybody look at me for a second. Don't let anything distract you. I listened to you just now. And can I be honest with you? You really didn't convince me. So I'm going to ask you again. Turn to your neighbor and say, I am an overcomer. Amen. See, the enemy is not going to move unless you make him move. And the number one enemy that you will have to face in your life is the one that you look at in the mirror. That's your flesh. And the very time when you don't feel like magnifying the King and making that demonstrative praise report to him is when you need to be doing just that. And so we're on part 21. You hear that, Tim, Richard, Charlene? Part 21. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think this probably will be a never-ending teaching, but I'm numbered them simply for the benefit of those who will come back and be looking at these different teachings as we go along, because the calendar is in every facet of everything that I've been looking at. And our search for truth seems ever widening in its scope, while at the same time, if you try to plummet the depths of it, it's a chasm-like project, and it's constantly unveiling things that are concealed. How many of you know that it is the glory of Elohim to conceal a matter, but it's the honor, the obligation of kings to search that out? And he's revealing things to us that have been hidden, I believe, for generations, just like Daniel was told, seal the books until the end. I believe these books are being unsealed incrementally for the express purpose of revealing to you, his chosen ones, the plans that he has for you in the days ahead and how you can be in the right place at the right time. And so you're hearing things that you may not have ever heard before. And because of that, as a result, you should not listen to me carefully. You should not be afraid to ask questions about the Torah. Why? Because most of our religious interpretations in the past have been clouded by our traditional assumptions, and they are just now, a lot of those religious assumptions, our paradigms, our dogma, our closely held beliefs, they're actually being exposed. And they're either the agenda of the enemy or the closed-minded efforts of those that seek to control people by feeding them their own particular dogma as truth. Listen to me, just because it's called truth doesn't make it truth until you search it out and verify it in his word. And I'm going to share this with you. If you're afraid for your traditions to be scrutinized, then that tells me you don't know if it's truth or not, because truth can stand scrutiny. You can look at truth. You can examine it. You can dig into it. And so, having said that, it's my contention that the Creation Covenant Calendar is becoming a beacon for truth seekers to rally around. More so, in my opinion, than any other topic that's currently being studied. In particular, as we've been looking at this, our position regarding the 360-day heavenly pattern is being stridently opposed by many. We're hearing from our friends at Covenant Calendar how they're being attacked on a weekly basis. We also have been underneath attack because of our position regarding this calendar. And I'm telling you, if it's truth, you can argue about it. You can argue against it, but you can't refute it. Say amen. And so this particular study today, hopefully, will serve as a lightning rod that will draw the attention of many more people to the light of his creational presence. And so I want to propose a few questions to you regarding that calendar. if we believe that there was a creation calendar, a covenantal calendar, and let me just assure you that a covenant is enjoined by two distinct entities, and both have to adhere to the covenant terms. If one fails to adhere to those terms, guess what? It does not obligate the original testator. Amen? And so what would you say constitutes an eternal calendar? And does, in fact, the creation calendar fit the criteria of being called eternal? And so when we consider this particular topic, we have to ask ourselves, what were the instruments or the bodies that actually regulate the creation calendar? And are they, as I personally believe, eternal themselves? Because if you have a creation covenant calendar that you propose is eternal, then whatever instrument regulates that calendar should also be eternal as well. Naturally, most assume these luminaries that regulate the calendar as the sun, moon, and stars. However, from our previous studies, we've concluded that the moon was never considered as part of the time-keeping mechanism that was set in the heavens. In fact, we're going to look at it today. We're going to look at one simple word, and that word is Chodesh. And that word is often used to support the lunar calendar position, which is opposed to the dawn day start of the calendar, which is associated with the 360-day calendar. But if you would take a proper Hebrew perspective, including Hebraic interpretation, you can eliminate that confusion, and we're going to hopefully show you that in the body of this teaching. With that said, you have to again ask yourself, are the stellar luminaries, in other words, the sun and the stars, indeed eternal? Have you ever thought about that? If so, or perhaps if not, is the earth eternal as well, since it is upon the earth that the calendar was intended to regulate the incidences of man's encounter with the Creator at the prescription of the creation calendar? So you need to consider what follows real carefully. Before we go into this study, which is, I promise you, is going to carry some places that you probably haven't been before, no one will argue the fact that both Adam and his bride, Isha, were created to administer the calendar in the Garden of Appointed Times. Break it down in the Hebrew language, Gan Eden, literally can be translated as the Garden of Appointed Times. Adam was placed there, put there, as the administrator, if you will. In that role as administrator, he was to function as a Melchizedek priest because he was to regulate the set times of those divine appointments, those holy convocations. Now, if that is the truth, most people will not argue that, but many forget that Adam and Chava, Isha, were actually created to live eternally. Did you hear that? So you have to ask yourself again, what did Elohim do to eradicate the effects of their sin upon what was initially created as an eternal heavens and an eternal earth? And because of their sin, shouldn't that alone necessitate a future redoing of creation? Now I want to just get you to hold your pause, your place right there. If we're talking about a new heavens and a new earth, creation being redone at some day in the future, let me ask you this. Why then did not Elohim recreate a new Adam and a new Eve? There are certain patterns. There are certain methods. And I want to ask you something. Is it possible that he's going to use that same pattern regarding Adam and Adam's subsequent restoration to use it as a pattern of how he will restore or quote-unquote recreate the heavens and the earth? Think about that. Because that's how he does business. He does things parabolically. He does them in patterns. When you see something that's a pattern or a parable, it uses things that are around you in your ordinary life, everyday life, as a teaching mechanism. And so this is what he's doing for us as we speak. And so again, we have to ask ourselves, has our conception of what originally was an eternal creation calendar set in an eternal heaven and administered upon an eternal earth, because of our specific dogma and teaching and perspective today, has it been reduced to an expectation that it will be in a future season eradicated or recreated? If that's the case, and I would dare say that probably everybody in here at one time has felt like that, if that's the case, what benchmark do you use to measure the future forecast of a recreation of the heavens and the earth? What do you use to measure that by? Well, let me just frame it this way. We do know that this has happened before. Shortly after the fall, where conditions deteriorated upon the earth until such time as Elohim intervened, yet there was a method that he used then to restore creation. And again, that's the law of first reference, and it sets in motion a specific pattern, a habitual way that he will treat this same subject or a subject akin to that in the days ahead. So we already have a pattern in the past that should be the pattern for how he's going to treat the quote-unquote new heavens and the earth, or creation of the new heavens and the earth in the future. And so if we also contend that this same end-time scenario was patterned and then presented in the earth in the aftermath of the flood, you have to go back and look at the text that surrounds that. Genesis chapter 8, verse 21, chapter 9, verse 1, and you'll find that Yahweh himself uses the same creation narrative here in Genesis 8 and Genesis 9 that he did all the way back in Genesis 1 when he first initially creates man and puts man in the earth. He tells Noah and his sons the very same thing with the same explicit Hebrew language. He says, be fruitful and multiply and replenish. Have you ever thought about that? Now, as a result, the earth was destroyed, as a result, was the earth simply destroyed or renovated? So you have to go back and look at these things in the original language, because the King James English and any other translation, I might add, by and large, most of the time does not lend the understanding that you can find in the Hebrew language. So we need to find out, was the earth destroyed? Was the earth renovated? What was going on? And what's going to happen in the days ahead to affect what we have been taught was an eternal calendar, but not administered in an eternal heaven or an eternal earth, right? Come on now. And so I found it coincidental, if you'll allow that term, that regarding the end times and how we should perceive what is going to happen in the end times, our Messiah is specifically asked this in Matthew chapter 24, a very familiar passage of scripture to you. And in particular in verse 37, there's a comparison that's made to the second coming of Yeshua, and it's relegated and compared to those previous days of Noah that I just read to you about there in chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 9 of Genesis. And so if we continue to think along the lines regarding the future eradication or renovation or recreation, dissolution, if you will, of a creation calendar, heavens and the earth, would the pattern of those quote-unquote days of Noah that Messiah is alluding to include a comparable future renovation of the heavens and the earth? What do most believers think? Well, I'm going to show you what most believers think. To frame this properly, since I've used the benchmark there in Genesis chapter 7, 8, and 9 regarding the flood of Noah, the subsequent renovation, reconstruction, recreation, whatever you want to call it, I'll allow you that position until while we're doing the study. It's interesting that he uses the same creational language, and he seals it by putting his signet, if you will, in the heavens called the rainbow. And having done that, he makes a promise. Listen to me carefully. He promises to never again destroy the earth, neither man, by a flood. And so we have to then ask ourselves, was the earth truly destroyed then? Because he's speaking to Noah, right? And we're told that the earth was destroyed by a flood. That's the terminology that used. And Yahweh himself, according to the King James English, says, I will never destroy. Isn't that what it says? To destroy something means to completely, at least from a Western mindset, to completely annihilate it, do away with it. Am I right? And so he says that he would never destroy the earth by a flood. So you have to ask yourself, was the earth truly destroyed, recreated in the true English sense of that word? Or have we been misled because we've been ignorant of the Hebrew language? Or was it perhaps that there was another agenda that was being fostered into or intertwined, if you will, into our understanding? So let's look at that word destroy. It comes from the Hebrew language, Strong's number 7843, shachat, and it is, according to the King James English, it's rendered as to mar, spoil, or corrupt. But look at the two-letter root, the shin het root, and this two-letter root's important because the root is the trunk of the house. You can look at my children and you can see a little bit of the understanding about the Mathews household. But if you want to really understand the Mathews household, you have to look at Brenda and I together. And then to really find out who the Mathews household is framed after, you need to look at the trunk of the person, the institution. So the shin het root tells us to incline, to stoop, to bow down, to be humble, to make something humble, to bring it low. And you need to also consider the fact that in finality regarding the promise to never destroy, he seals it with an oath, sticks his signet, his seal, his promise in the heavens. And so if you look at the Hebrew text regarding this word destroy and the specific context, he promised to, when he says, I will never destroy, he is literally promising to never bring the earth and its purpose to ruin, to spoil. In other words, to never bring it low again, to never allow it to be humbled by a flood that destroys its purpose. What was its purpose? If you go back and continue to read that chapter, you'll find that his purpose was a habitation for the sons of Noah for perpetual generations. Hello? I know what you're probably wondering. What does perpetual mean? Because that should give us a little bit of insight about how long the earth should be existing in relationship to the perpetual generations of the sons of Noah. Right? And I know you're probably asking, what does this teaching regarding the heavens and the earth have to do with the creation calendar? Let me just share this once more with you. The creation covenant calendar is set in the heavens. It's an instrument set in the heavens that is to orchestrate time on the earth. Time is literally the gestational cycle that's related to the bride of the husband, the king. And so it's an instrument set in the heavens that was used on the earth to regulate the cycles of the relationship between the husband and his bride. Okay? And then again, if it was set and in the stellar luminaries, is that an eternal creation? And if it's eternal, was where its instrument is placed and it's put into motion, is that place the earth? Is it also eternal? And if that instrument is used to regulate the gestational cycle of the bride in her relationship to her husband, is that bride or the company bride, is she also eternal? Because, can I be honest, you can't have one without the other. Hello? Now, perpetual. The word olam. It's most often used to indicate something that's forever or everlasting. If you look at Parkhurst, page 382 to 383, it actually insinuates, an indefinite or indeterminate time that is related to a secret time or an unknown time sealed from man. Parkhurst further reckons that the same root letters, the ayin, lamed, mem, point towards another word that's used to describe a youth, a young person, regardless of its gender, male or a female. I'm not saying that there are mixed genders. I'm saying that whether it's a male or a female, a man or a woman, who maintains their virginity their entire lives. And so when you see that word perpetual, and it's talking perpetual generations, why was Noah considered a righteous man? Have you ever asked yourself? And Noah was righteous in his generations. Have you ever, go back and get the book called The Serpent Seed. I wrote that book specifically regarding this. I'm just a shameless plug, but it tells you that he was considered righteous in his generations because he and his wife, 3 sons and their wives, were the only 8 individuals upon the earth at the time of the flood whose generations had not been corrupted by the fallen one's seed, okay? And so now you see perpetual. It indicates an individual, male or female, man or woman, who has maintained their virgin their entire lives. And so this word perpetual hints that as long as a virtuous generation is found upon the earth's purpose will never be destroyed by a flood. Ah, gotcha. But what about fire? Well, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that if Elohim was indeed going to destroy the earth's purpose as a habitation, and I'm not going to destroy its purpose as a habitation, I'll just destroy it by fire, and not a flood this time. Well, it doesn't make a difference if you're going to destroy it, what tactic you use or not, just destroy it, right? See, this is things that you need to think about that you probably have just let go in one ear and out the other. But if he was indeed going to destroy the earth's purpose as a habitation for a righteous generation, whether it was by flood or fire, then I personally believe that he would have inserted something parenthetically, oh, but wait a second. One day in the future, I'm going to destroy it by fire. Well, either way, it makes our future kind of tenuous, does it not? And so it seems to me that the creation covenant and its calendar of appointed times was without doubt designed for intimacy with the righteous bride, the husband, and intimacy with his righteous bride, she who would function as his tabernacle, and she who would go into his tabernacle, which was upon the earth. And I submit to you that is indeed eternal. But I know you like to argue. And so for argument's sake, we're going to look at what is said in the New Testament regarding the new heavens and the new earth. Now, before we proceed, I want to stipulate. I have to ask you to carefully consider the following. What is the benchmark, the criteria for proper scriptural exegesis? Now, I may be accused of blasphemy. I have it written down, so in case you want to mark it, you can come back and call me to account for it. But the New Testament cannot, say that with me, cannot. That is a negative. It cannot be the primary source of doctrinal truth. And now that hurts to a lot of us that were raised in the charismatic Pentecostal churches. But I am here to tell you that the New Testament has to stand subservient to, I don't like to use that term, but it is subservient to the Torah as the second witness to Torah. Every doctrine that has to do with the redemption, salvific plan of Yahweh for man can be found in the Torah. So that does not do away with anything that's said in the New Testament. It's how we have been taught to interpret it. In fact, the New Testament is about 85% directly quoting the Tanakh, while the remaining 15% is how our Messiah and his Talmudim walked it out in their lives. Okay? And so when you say the law's been done away with, my goodness, you just unearthed your foundation and it's crashed. When you consider the fact that the Hebrew text of the Old Testament does not contain comprehensive and deliberate mistranslations that are rife within all of the translations that we currently have today regarding the New Testament, then it should add some clarity to what we're talking about. And so if you consider that, and if you personally will research the Torah, where you find the foundational principles for the Creation Covenant Calendar, it has to be verified in the Torah alone. And let me just share this with you. There's not one text that can be found in the Torah that will give you proof of a future recreation of a new heaven and or a new earth. Not one. So we need to stop and consider that. Because in stark contrast to that, we're often force-fed New Testament texts taken out of context, not properly interpreted according to the original language. And those are used as the basic argument for the recreation, the dissolution, if you will, of the current heavens and the current earth, and a recreation of the heavens and the earth. And what they use for an example is our own living witness, our Messiah, and he himself uses metaphorical language which many suppose reveals his support for what we're sharing with you this afternoon, a future heaven and an earth's recreation. And so I want to caution you. Because of deliberate mistranslations, the text that I'm going to share with you, found in Matthew chapter 5, how many of you are familiar with the Sermon on the Mount? That text has become a convoluted, mistaught benchmark, and it's taken out of context, used by individuals to say that in the days ahead there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, when in all actuality the text specifically is dealing with the longevity of the Torah, has nothing to do specifically with how long the heaven and the earth will be here. I'll read this verse to you. Are you with me? Yes. Till heaven and earth pass away. Right there it is. Heaven and earth are going to pass away, right? Matthew 5:18. Come on now, help me out. You know that. I know you don't want to shake your head or not, because you'll think, I know this, I know where they stand. Till heaven and earth pass away seems to tell me that they're going to pass away. But then it says, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the Torah until all is accomplished. If you read Matthew chapter 5, verse 18, it's literally saying right there, according to the King James English, that when the heavens and the earth pass away and all is accomplished, then the Torah is going to pass away as well. That's what that text reads, if you will be honest with yourself. And so, for those that hold a recreation position, this is suggesting that the heavens and the earth are going to pass away in conjunction with the cessation of the Torah. Read it for yourself. How many of you ever went to school, whether you were homeschooled or not? Raise your hand high. How many of you ever studied English? How many of you understood what grammar was? Not your grandma. Grammar. This is about grammar. You can find proper grammatical structure if you'll just look for it, but we want to overlook that, okay? So what is truth? Now I have to stop and identify something for you. What exactly was the Torah, and to whom was the Torah given? The answer clearly is that it's a wedding ketubah, a wedding covenant contract given to the bride by her husband to be. Okay? And so now I want to ask you a question. Look at me carefully. Will either of these, covenant, bride, or husband, ever cease to exist? Come on now. I was speaking to a young man just a couple of days ago, and he's actually teaching on a marriage covenant. And he was talking about the fundamental principles of the marriage and what transpires when a husband and a bride and a groom get married. And I said, what is the first thing that's supposed to happen? They have to have a place to live. Why do you need a place to live? Well, you got to have food, clothing, and shelter. That's not the reason you need a place to live. You need a place to live so that you can fulfill the mandate of being fruitful, multiplying, replenishing, subduing, and having dominion. Am I right? And so the covenant regulates the terms of how and where and when, and the bride and the husband is to conduct themselves and where they're supposed to live. Hello? And so if it's true that the calendar regulates the gestational cycle of that bride, then I have to ask you then, since we've been looking at the proposal that it would be one day done away with, is it possible that she, the bride, raise your hand if you feel like you're part of the bride, is it possible that at some point in your life, that spiritually speaking, that you will become barren and too old to produce sons, according to Genesis 1:26 through 28, be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion? And if that's the case, then maybe there's an argument there. But Adam and Isha were never told that. In fact, Isn't there an example found in Abraham and Sarah to guide us here? Because Sarah was considered old and beyond the childbearing years, and so was Abraham, and yet Abba intervenes and they were able to produce godly seed. Do you see where I'm going with this? Will the bride ever be done away with? Will the bride ever be recreated? Will the husband ever be done away with? Will the husband ever be recreated? Will the covenant ever be done away with? Will there be a need for another covenant? You see, all of this has to figure in with the time constraints that are regulated in the heavens. And so simply put, will the Torah ever be not needed or not in force? Will there ever be a point in the near future when heaven and earth will be eradicated or supplant the Torah? Clearly, if you study Matthew chapter 5 and the grammar associated, even in the English, but if you go back and look at the syntax and the structure of it in the Greek language, and then take that back to the purest form of instruction, the Hebrew, you'll find that what Yeshua is doing, he's using what is referred to as an idiomatic expression. And he's tying, because he was the living word. He was the Torah manifest in the earth. He's using that idiomatic expression, tying the eternal duration of Torah to the eternal lifetime of the heavens and the earth. Yet the vast majority of New Testament students disagree. And that's why I believe these questions have to be answered. But unfortunately, what we found when proper scriptural truth is sought, most believers do in fact turn to the New Testament for the majority of their doctrinal positions. And so because of that, regarding an eternal covenant, they are left to conclude, indeed, the heavens and the earth are only temporal and will be destroyed and recreated. And in support of that, they cite such scriptures as Revelation 21, verse 1. Last book of the Bible, final word on what we're talking about. Come on now. I'm going to read it to you. Revelation 21, 1. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. There it is. There it is. Trapped you, pastor. Trapped you, backed you into a corner. I've been backed into a corner, painted myself into corners a lot of times. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. There it is. Got you twice. And there was no more sea. Well, is that really the final word? Let's take into consideration what we're talking about here. The basic premise is that of a new creation in sometime in our future, and if that's properly scrutinized, will it hold fast? So if the above presumption that most of us have had is true, and the heavens and the earth are temporary, then wouldn't the need for a creation covenant calendar and the Melchizedek priesthood that's charged with administrating that calendar, wouldn't they become antiquated and unnecessary at the creation of a subsequent new heaven and a subsequent new earth? Help me out. I mean, this is just basic, reasonable deduction here. I want you to understand something. The husband and the pattern of the first Adam was intended to be both king and priest, and Yeshua eternally fulfilled that example. Nobody will argue that, at least not that I know of in the church. And so, if there is in fact a new creation, which means that the current Melchizedek priesthood and the current calendar that administers that, then there would of necessity have to be a new calendar and a new priesthood. I mean, that just seems to work in conjunction. If something's new, you don't put new wine into an old wineskin. See what I'm saying? So if he renovates or makes something new, then he has to bring the rest of it in that's new, right? Well, where does that leave us when you consider Psalm 110, verse 4? Yahweh hath sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And so for this reason alone, our king and priest would never not be needed in his house. Hello? Furthermore, Let me ask you this. Do you suppose that he would ever seek intimacy, which is definitely regulated by the Creation Covenant Calendar in a 360-day year, 12 months or 30 days? Would he never not seek intimacy with her? And would there be a time when his bride would no longer be affected by sin's aging process? And so you see that one is set in the heavens as an eternal regulator, one is an eternal administrator, one is the eternal beneficiary. Can you see that? And so we need to understand the importance of what we're discussing here. And so there are several words that I want you to look at with me. We're going to look at them in proper context. And say this with me. And I saw a new. That's in Hebrew, it's the word, in Greek it's the word kainos. And it's rendered new as it respects form, fresh, recently made. There you go. Got you again. We've trapped you so many times, there's no way you can wiggle out. That has to prove the dissolving of the old and the subsequent creation of a new, right? That's why you need to go back and look at this little bitty innocuous Greek word used in the Septuagint. Because in the Septuagint, this word kainos is substituted for a rather interesting word that I first addressed all the way back in the very first couple of paragraphs regarding why the moon is not considered part of the time-keeping mechanism. This word kainos is used as the substitute for the word chadash or chodesh. This very word rendered chadash or chodesh, mentioned, as I said earlier on, is the foundational support for observing a lunar calendar, where many believe that the moon, particularly the sliver moon, serves as a timekeeping instrument. So when we get to the bottom of the definition of this word chadash or chodesh, depending on the vowel points, it will bring some clarity. Look at it, chadash, Strong's number 2319 in the Hebrew. I want to move very slow here because I want you to get this. Not that I'm trying to apologize. Not that I'm saying you're slow. I want to make sure that I articulate it properly. Is that okay? Because I know you're not slow. If you were slow, you wouldn't be here. Say amen. This word is the subject of a lot of misunderstanding and mistranslation, especially when it's translated from Hebrew into Greek, English, or otherwise. It is the word most often associated with the sliver moon, and it's used to define, this is where you normally find the Strong's or any other definition saying it's a new or a fresh thing. Hence the reason most people link it to the sliver of the moon as the sign of when the months begin. At the renewing of the light of the moon in the sliver, specifically at the evening that it's first visible. And therefore, for our Jewish brothers and most of the Hebrews Messianics, their day is said to start at the evening, but again, is that the truth? If you go back and look at what Parkhurst says regarding this word chodesh, he has an emphatic no. What he actually says is that chodesh or chadash, its original intent was that of a renewing or a restoration to a former state. He says that it has no more relation to the moon than it would to the sun. And it's quite evident throughout history that the Jewish month was calculated at 30 days and never synodic or related to the moon in its origin, else the year would have been 12 months of 29 and a half days or 354 days instead of creation's 360 days. And once more, no scholar that I know of will argue regarding Daniel's timeline and the fact that he uses 1260, 1290, 1335, and nobody will argue Revelation mentioning the same numbers as being related to 12 months or 30 days of 360-day calendar. They just figured, well, they were just using prophetic language. Very few will acknowledge that there's going to have to be some kind of change in the observance of the calendar year for that to happen, okay? Now, this word Kadash could only, in context, indicate the first day of the new month and has no connection to lunar phases. He likewise reckons the usage of Kadash as the beginning or renewal of the month, in other words, like day one, rather than a renewing of the moon cycle, which cannot fit the 12 months or 30-day pattern. Now, as a little side note, how many of you like to take a little side trip occasionally? I found it interesting. If you look at 354 days of the lunar calendar versus the 360-day Creation Covenant calendar, you have 6 days of 24 hours. The difference between the two, and it equals 144. It just so happens that the numeric value of that 144 is the same as the Hebrew word yid-deoni, and it indicates one who has a familiar spirit, a soothsayer, or a necromancer. And this is a striking correlation, and it probably will anger some that would still adhere to a lunar calendar, but you cannot argue the fact that the lunar calendar is Babylonian in its origin, and that fact cannot be invalidated. In addition, Yed-Deoni has a root, and that root is Yada, and the description of Babylon's mystical religion fits this root perfectly because it hints at intimate knowledge that is released through a sexual act. Did you know idolatry is spiritual adultery? Hello? Did you know that no one ever commits adultery in the physical without first committing adultery in the mind? You got that? Well, why is this definition important? Because Revelation 21:1 uses kainos in the same way as that word kodesh, and therefore of a necessity, it has to indicate that what John saw was a renewal or a restoration, a renovation of the heavens and the earth, as opposed to an entirely new and supplemental creation. Now, I thought it was interesting because is it possible that number 144 means something to us in the future? Did you know that there's 144,000 that are considered virtuous in the book of Revelation? Is it possible that the 144,000 may have something to do with those in this day that we're facing right now who embrace the restoration of a 360-day Creation Covenant calendar? Did you know that the first 144 digits in pi, 3.14, which is an infinite number, and you take the first 144 digits and you add those 144 digits, you get the number 666. Is that interesting? Did you know that a full circle is 360 degrees? But if you looked at 144 degrees, 144 degrees is 12/30ths of a circle. Did you know that harmonic 144 is the speed of light? Strictly coincidental. Has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Glad you feel that way. Let's look a little bit further. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and then it clarifies it for the first one. Right? The first one had been done away with. That's what we kind of think. In Greek, it's the word protos. Translated here as first in time or place, the beginning. However, its root suggests in front of, as in the one before. This Greek word, protos, is used in place of the Hebrew words echad and rishon, both hinting at the one before the current one, as in the first echad of the month. This is not a new month, simply the one that's coming after the last one or the first of another cycle, not necessarily a new or existing one. And to confirm that, look at again, grammar, syntax. What does he say? Let me back up. The first heaven and the first earth let me back up and find it again, if I can find it. Anyway, he says, I saw a new heavens and a new earth, for the first earth and the first heaven were passed away. And then he says something really important. And there was no more sea. Right? the word see here, you need to focus on. It speaks, in my opinion, that John is specifically noticing something when he's looking at this potential recreation project. I believe it was renovation. And he has specifically noticed the absence of the sea upon the earth, and it tells us that the writer is looking at a renovation because he's looking at something. He said, well, the sea's been moved. I'll show you in the language. But don't dismiss the reference to sea. And he says, and there was. The phrase is este, third person singular of to be. He, she, it is, to be also was. From a root indicating to exist, to happen, to be present. There was no. It's the Greek word we or woo. It's an absolute negative indicating no, not, cannot. And then you have the word more, and there was no more. The Greek word here is eti, of a thing which went on formerly, whereas now it is a different state of things existing or that has begun to exist. And so again, from a grammatical perspective, if John is looking at a brand new heaven and earth, why use the term no more or eti? Why not just say, and there was no sea? But he says, and there was no more, eti. Which is indicating that he is observing what he's observing now, once had seas but no longer does. Recreation or renovation? Hello? In addition, you have to ask yourself, is this reference to an absence of SEA as in singular, or should it have been in a plural form? I believe it's extremely important because you have Genesis chapter 1, the creation account, which indicates that the original condition of the earth may have entailed all of the seas. That's the term that's used. S-E-A-S is the English word, but the phrase in Hebrew is yamin, indicating plural form. That at one time all of the seas, plural, were gathered into one body, with the land masses or continents also forming one large mass. Now I'm going to step out way on a limb, and don't come out on this limb if you don't have something to hang on, okay? Is it possible that what John is referencing here is also pointing us back to the Genesis chapter 7:11 flood account, where Noah is referencing that the fountains of the deep were all broken up, released from their bounds, their boundaries, which led to the division of the earth's land mass into separate continents? Is that something kind of preposterous to consider? Well, let's look and see what Isaiah 54, verse 9 and 10 says within context. For this is as the waters of Noah unto me, for, listen to me carefully, for as I have sworn that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth, so have I sworn that I would not be wroth with you, nor rebuke you. And then he adds some quality to his statement. For the mountains shall depart. Listen to me carefully. He's telling us that not ever again will the waters of Noah go over the earth. Remember, we found out that the earth was humbled by that for a purpose, because of what took place after the fall, right? But here we're being told that the mountains will depart and the hills shall be removed. But my kindness shall not depart from you, neither shall my covenant of peace be removed, saith Yahweh that hath mercy on thee. I want to focus on a couple of things here. There's something that confirms that the earth will never be destroyed by a flood again, right there. No longer shall the waters of Noah go over the earth. But he also then adds to that, saying that the mountains are going to depart and the hills are going to be removed. Did you hear that? Are you listening to me? Is this hard for you? And then he adds some oomph to it. He says, and my covenant of peace shall never be removed. Well, I want to find out several things. I want to ask you about these mountains and hills departing, but I also want to talk to you about that covenant of peace. It seems to me that there's some sort of a hint here in Isaiah regarding the flood account of Noah. And so I'm asking you, is it possible if the waters of Noah will no longer go over the earth, but the mountains are going to be made low? How many of you have ever heard that? See, you've heard some stuff, and it's been inconsistent. You got to try to put these pieces of the puzzle together. And so is it possible that the future earth is going to be more of a united flat plain than what we are currently existing on? Consider the phrase waters of Noah. Is it possible that the earth's present humble condition is finally going to be restored to that of the creation model? You know, I'm just not sure. Romans chapter 8 says, creation is groaning for the manifestation of the sons of Elohim. Creation is groaning. There's going to come a day in the future when the earth as we know it is going to also be released from the curse that is on it. Are you listening to me? Does that mean that Yahweh's going to have to completely redo it, recreate a new heaven and a new earth so that there will be no curse? If that's the case, why not have recreated Adam and Eve and do away with all of you? Why not? Because sin is still working. As long as there's a fleshly carnal man here, sin is still working. Am I right? The curse is still operating. Am I right? But you all hold fast to that great hope that there's going to be a day in the future where you will put off this temporary body and you will have a glorified body. But listen to, if that's the case, won't you still be here, but your body will have just been renovated? What about this covenant of peace? If you go back and research it, it deals specifically with the restoration of the marital relationship between what had been from Genesis chapter 3 forward an adulterous bride. The adulterous bride, if you go back and read Numbers chapter 5, deserves the cup of bitter waters. And in fact, if you go back and look at the flood waters on the earth in the Genesis account, that was the bitter waters unleashed in the earth. And every entity that consumed those bitter waters of jealousy during the stages of the flood died. Now, restoring that covenant entailed the husband, our Messiah, drinking that cup of death, the cup of bitter waters on her behalf. And we're told here, because when he drinks that cup of bitter waters, we could not drink it ourselves because we were guilty. He drinks it for us. Now you know why in Gethsemane he says, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. He's talking about the cup of bitter waters, the cup of jealousy. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. He drinks a cup of bitter waters so that there could be peace on earth and goodwill towards men. That's why you had the angels that appeared according to our records there in the Gospels, and that's the first thing that was said, peace on earth, goodwill towards men. Why? I have restored the covenant of peace. There's one coming who's going to take that penalty. Amen? But what about this means for restoration? Was it only set in motion after the fall of Genesis chapter 3? Or is it possible that the terms of the peace covenant was originally initiated at creation and written in the stellar luminaries? Yes, that's what happened. And not only was it expressly written, it was chronologically structured to be walked out and lived on the earth, revealed, witnessed, and attested to in the rehearsals called the Holy Convocations. Each of these are scheduled prophetically to coincide with the gestational cycle on a 360-day calendar, whose true purpose could only be but to regulate the cycles of a redeemed bride who has now been given the opportunity to not walk according to the flesh, but after the Spirit, and embrace that covenant of peace which he prophesied, he declared in his word, shall never be removed. Well, then where does that leave the need for the witness of that calendar or clock that was set first in the eternal heavens and then echoed in an eternal portal on the earth that was open for our behalf. I thought that was interesting. The heavens declare the glory of Elohim first. The heavens serve as its witness. Now, I want you to back up with me to Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, because I want to look at the fountains of the deep. Are y'all getting anything out of this? The word fountains here is the word mayan. It's translated as spring from the root ayin. But Parkhurst, you need to go get John Parkhurst's dictionary if you can get it. Hebrew, English dictionary without vowel points. The best by far, in my opinion, that's out there. There's a 3-letter root, mem, ayin, nun, mon, that is rendered as a place of residence, habitation, and dwelling, where you have to ask yourself, were the original constraints that were placed on the seas at creation, seas, plural, somehow unleashed, allowing for a shifting of the earth's structural plates during the flood? Fountains of the deep were broken. It's the word bakah, which means to separate contiguous or adjoining parts, to cleave them, to split them, open a valley or a break between the mountains. And so some of you may take exception to what I'm saying, and you may be just basking in incredulity, but I'm telling you there's overwhelming evidence to support my opinion. In fact, there are a lot of ancient texts that indicate that there was once a flat encircling single body of water that encompassed a central land mass. And it's my opinion that at some point, probably the flood, when the fountains of the deep were broken up, that it caused this great body of the earth to erupt at its core, splitting the single above water land mass into separate continents and causing a great upheaval, resulting into the mountainous ridges and lower plains that we have today. The resulting effects, leaving pooled bodies of waters also called seas around the earth. Seas. There's that word again. In the Greek, it's the word thalassa, and it's used as sea in general. The Mediterranean or Red Sea specifically, the Sea of Galilee is another one. It's substituted in the Septuagint of the Greek for the word yam that you first see in Genesis chapter 1:10, which is in fact written in the plural form, yamim. Strong's number 3220 is the root. And it's translated sea again, Mediterranean, Red Sea, Sea of Galilee, also for the river Nile. I thought it was interesting that this word yam also points toward or indicates a westward direction and is said to infer a roaring sound. I know you're probably still skeptical, but is it possible that John could have been seeing, listen to me carefully, because John's probably seeing a time in the future when the mountains are going to be made low. Isaiah talks about it. Is it possible that John could have been seeing all of the seas being removed, complete recreation, or was it possible that maybe a specific body known to him, John is on the Isle of Patmos, which is an island between Africa and Europe. Is it possible that what he's seeing is that he's no longer seeing an isolated sea, but they're all being gathered together in a collective body? Africa joined to Europe. I know, again, I have it here in my notes. I'm fully aware of what may come from this. People will probably say he fell off his rocker. This is merely an assumption, hypothetical. But again, go with me to Genesis chapter 1, verse 9 and 10. And Elohim said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place. One place. Waters be gathered together into one place. By the way, did you notice it said waters under the heavens? Leads you to believe that there's waters in the heavens. Did you know that the ancients all believed, the ancient civilizations all believed that there was oceans in the heavens? Just food for thought. And let the dry land appear, and it was so. And Elohim called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and Elohim saw that it was good. The word gathered here is the word kavah, and it's defined as to wait or to look for by most of the translators. But when you see Parkhurst looking at it, he translates it as a stretching forth or a tending towards. I have a tendency towards Brenda. I gravitate, I'm drawn to her. See what I'm saying? That word tend, as in the South, we understand. Go tend to that. I told you to tend to it. You tend to your own business. That means to guard, protect, gravitate to, nurse, take care of, attend to. The place where water tends to. And so it's the place that waters would naturally gather. It hints at something being bound together strong and in a robust binding fast. What do you suppose these waters are guarding and protecting and caring for? As they're gravitating to one echad place, immediately the dry land appears. The waters have a purpose. They're to tend to something. They have a responsibility. They have a mandate, a charge from the inception of creation. The word dry, Yabashah, Brenda knows that. Brenda's wrote everything all the way up to chapter 15 of Genesis. It indicates the dry land. Earth, Eretz. I want you to notice, never saw this until this particular teaching. How do you spell earth, Eretz? Aleph, Resh, Zadi. When you have the aleph appended to the front of a word, it gives you future tense, I will. The Resh Zadi root stem, according to Parkhurst, indicates to move something swiftly and to force one thing against another. Let the dry lands appear while the waters tend it. If you tend animals, you watch them, you're surrounding them, you're taking care of them. Y'all giving me a hard time today. It seems to hint that the waters are made to recede into one place, leaving the dry land all forced into one body. And Elohim calls the gathering of those seas a mikvah of seas. Notice how mikvah is written here. It's different than the word kavah, where it says gather. This is a mikvah of seas, a gathering of seas. Mem, kuf, vaya, vav, hey. You see that? The mem indicates a womb. That which encircles or encompasses. It can also indicate chaotic waters. And if you look at the ancient pictograph of the kuf, it was literally depicted as the horizon that was viewed by the ancients from the land. And so is it possible that this is hinting that the waters wombed the dry land, circumscribing the earth in the same patterns that the heavens above would have, literally depicting or etching the calendar upon the earth by casting a 360-degree circle or vault around the earth? I know what you think. You got off your calendar teaching. I want to look at this. Some of y'all may not study the way I do. But sometimes I see these connections and I'll be there, I'll scratch my head. I'm thinking, man, have you ever just stopped and looked at the word yam for sea in Hebrew? Spelled the same as the Hebrew word yom for day. Look, can I just share something with you? Words in Hebrew are related. Every individual Hebrew letter is a pictograph, a word picture. When you have the same word letters in a specific word, you can find that it's related to whatever this new word may be that's created from those same letters. Like ish for man. In addition to Adam, you have ish. And then you have isha. Same root letters, but the hay's added on the end of it. Ish is the same root word as esh for fire. So a man is a fire man, a man with fire in him. And the woman is a woman that wombs the fire and says, behold, hey, look at the fire over here. She's been doing that for 32 years. So my point is, when you see yom, day, yam, seas, there's a connection, a divine connection that we have overlooked. And in both cases, the yod mem root indicates something that's tumultuous. in agitation. Parkhurst says it's like agitation of the celestial fluid that was there at the inception of creation. One agitation forms day, while another caused a tumultuous motion upon the face of the seas. And so from that you have to conclude that day, yom, and sea, yom, are related. Yom for day, without argument, regulates the dawn day start of a 24-hour period assigned to day one, and as such is the linchpin of the Creation Covenant Calendar. If Yom Day, the day start of the day, cannot be separated from the calendar, it's the nucleus, it's the DNA of the calendar, what about the same two-letter root stem that gives us the word just articulated with a vowel point, Yom? Hello? Somehow, mysteriously, it's connected to the same timekeeping mechanism, only in a way that you probably have never considered before. Oh, have you ever heard of the word clepsydra? No, not kleptomaniac. Clepsydra? Anybody ever heard of that? Not till I did this study, but did you know that that was an ancient timekeeping, excuse me, I'm watching the clock and I know I'm running out of time. So my mouth's moving faster than my mind. My mind's actually moving faster than my mouth. Clepsydra was an ancient timekeeping mechanism, extremely accurate, where they would put water inside a vessel and they would measure, it had a hole in its bottom, and they would measure it. And it was a very accurate way of keeping time. I wonder, do you suppose that maybe the seas have something to do with the recording of the time, something to do with helping instruct whomever was on this one central body called the Eretz in the calendar of Yahweh? I'm just asking. The sea and time. Job chapter 26, verse 10. He hath compassed the waters with bounds until the day and night come to an end. Wait a second, did you hear that? Day and night, that's regulating time, am I right? And it says here that he has compassed the waters with bounds until the day and night come to an end. So again, if you go back and study the book of Job, Job has a running conversation with Elohim about a lot of things in the stellar luminaries. Look at the word compassed. It's the word hug, which means to encircle, to describe a circle, but it also is the same root that indicates a feast or a festival, to dance in a circle. The Septuagint translate the words bounds from the same root, hok, meaning a statue. Excuse me. Thus, by a lawful decree, he has encompassed the surface of the waters. Did you hear what I just said? The physical encircling becomes a lawful decree. What that says in the Hebrew language is that he's put the waters on the earth and prescribed a circular boundary for them, and it was a lawful decree. Did you hear me? Look at the word bounds. It's that word hok, meaning a statute, a decree, an ordinance. And so the text here indicates that the seas were set and prescribed, given a task that was a law set in motion from the beginning of creation, and it actually concerned the inscribing of a circle. You think maybe it had something to do with the festival calendar that Yahweh might have had demonstrated on the physical earth? Well, let me also stipulate that when Yahweh sets a law into motion, it can never be set aside. It can be superseded by a higher law. In other words, the law of sin and death cannot be ever done away with. But it can be superseded by the law of life found in the Messiah Yeshua. Gravity, the law will never go away with, but the law of lift and thrust can supersede that. You see that? So the word huk there comes from the root of a word that indicates pilgrimage festivals such as Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And so this encompassing or encircling involved a lawful decree where those waters served as a boundary, listen to me now, until day and night, light and darkness would end. Exactly like the terminator line in the heavens that marks the path of the sun. In fact, Like the word yom, day, this same line forms the shadow of the sun that travels its circuit. So is it possible that the ancient seas could have delineated the boundaries of light and day much like the word yom, or day above? And doesn't this also seem to hint that this encompassing or encircling by the seas may also have been closely related to the pilgrimage festival, since it originates from the same root? And to add some emphasis here, consider Proverbs 8:27. Now listen to me carefully, because there was never any punctuation or italicization or capitalization in the Hebrew language. You need to remember that. It's added by the translators and not always correct. Proverbs 8:27. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass on the face of the depth, to whom? It's disjointed. When he set a compass, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the depth of the to whom. If you read that without the punctuations, here's what should be said. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the deep. And that's telling you that as soon as he prepared the heavens, that a second witness was almost instantaneous or simultaneous, because what Yahweh did was set a compass on the face of the deep, or the oceans, at the same time. While it was being set in the heavens, while he was preparing the heavens, I witnessed him set the same compass, impress his mark on the earth at the same time. Is it possible that the heavens in some way cast an image of their principal obligation, their message, their purpose, the creation calendar, upon the earth, where the result produced a compass of sorts mirrored by the seas? The word prepared there means to fix something, to arrange it, to stand it upright. And again, you have the word compass, which means hook, circle, circuit, or compass. And so once again, in that same verse, we have the idea of the heavens serving somewhat like an overhead projector that would cast its circular boundaries upon the earth. This fixing or arranging of the heavens seems to have subsequently set into motion its compass or circuit or festival calendar on the earth at the same time. And so is it plausible then to assume that at the same time the 360 degrees of the heavenly circle that serves to regulate the holy convocations, specifically the pilgrimage festivals, at the same time became a mirror image that was cast upon the seas here in the earth? Is it possible that it became a mirror of what was in the stellar luminaries? I'm not so sure. Well, can I give you book, chapter, and verse where there is an instrument built just outside the tabernacle of the Most High, demonstrating this exact purpose? 1 Kings 7, verse 23. And he, Solomon, made a molten sea, 10 cubits. Why would he make a molten sea? Why would they refer to it as a molten sea? 10 cubits from the one brim to the other. We did a teaching on this. You can go find pi in this. You can find the 360 degrees, 12 times 30. It's just rife with information. It was round all about, and its height was 5 cubits, and a line of 30 cubits did compass it round about. Now, while you're thinking here, immediately when he starts talking about the molten sea, just prior to that, he had constructed the 2 columns in front of the temple, Joachim and Boaz. Both of those served to direct the shadow through the gateway, the shadow of the vernal equinox through the gateway, through the sanctuary doors, and help them to establish Yahweh's calendar, his eternal calendar, in the tabernacle that Solomon had built. It helped them to effectively mark the shadow, just like the tabernacle in the wilderness when Yahweh said to Moshe, "This shall be the beginning of months." Helped them determine day 1 of the new month, first month, and the new year. Furthermore, the purpose of this molten sea as a water vessel, could this water vessel that he's built could it have actually been a clepsydra? Could it have been a water clock? Think about it. we all acknowledge that it was for the personal cleansing of the priests who attended the temple, and it was used in there as a ritual mikvah for them to cleanse themselves. They would look in it to see if there were any imperfections. Let me just share this with you. You look into the stellar luminaries, into the redemption salvific message of the Creator to see if there are any imperfections in you, because the message of the Torah was first written in the heavens and then given as a second eternal witness in the earth, okay? And so are the holy convocations in their proper place that are regulated by the Creation Covenant Calendar, are they in fact also ritual mikvahs, ritual opportunities for you to be cleansed? And I thought, we just did a wedding this past weekend. Isn't it fun to consider how the Hebrew wedding requires a ritual marital mikvah by the husband and bride, and when they, regardless of what they may have been through, the sages believe that when they take that ritual mikvah, that when they come out of the mikvah on the other side, that they are just as Adam and Eve were in the garden prior to the fall, just as if they'd never sinned before. That's what the rehearsals are in these holy convocations. I thought, isn't it important to regard the critical timing of these immersions? And in retrospect, let me just ask you this question. Have you ever asked yourself, this is probably something that you've never thought about before, but I was raised on the Gulf Coast. Have you ever considered how millions, like a moth to a flame, are unknowingly, ununderstanding, drawn to the sea to immerse themselves in the healing waters that it provides? Have you ever asked yourself, how many of here, by times you just feel, man, I want to go see, I want to go to the coast, I want to get in the waters. There's something drawing about it. You can poo-poo that if you want to say, that's just mere coincidence. But is it possible that they serve an ancient secret purpose from the beginning of creation, where they were an all-encompassing body of waters, and that they provided an earthly mikvah in the fashion of what was written in the stellar luminaries after the heavenly pattern? Solomon builds a molten sea. Molten is the word musak, and it's said to have originated from the root of eghil or achil, a word that is often translated as earrings. And if you heard Brittany teach on the earrings that the golden calf was made from last week, you can understand why this is important, because it indicates a circle, to revolve, a circuit. And it's also related to the word calf, eglim. And it seems to indicate in this particular case that this molten sea was a circular vessel filled with water. And is it possible, following that pattern, that Israel was brought to Mount Sinai and afforded an opportunity to mikvah themselves with intimate intentions before their groom? Because what happened at Mount Sinai at Shavuot was preparations for a wedding covenant to be given them. A mikvah was surely going to take place. But instead, while Moshe is receiving the terms of the contract that they had already heard vocalized and had assented and affirmed by saying, all that you've said we will do, while he's there, they decide they're going to prostitute themselves to a golden calf, to a different circuit, to a different revolution, to something else that was not intended for them in creation's calendar. I looked at the two-letter root stem of that word, musak. The Zadikuf root has that mem prefix in front of it, indicating the source of origin. So the Zadikuf follows something here. Parkhurst defines Zadikuf as pressing something down and to compress it at the same time. 1 Samuel 2:8 uses a derivative of these same words to indicate something that is the instrument of that compressing, as in the compressing together of the earth, where the celestial fluid compresses the parts together. And so it seems that there's a spiritual pattern in the design of Solomon's molten sea, and it's pointing towards the column of the seas in the heavens setting upon the earth as an instrument compressing the land masses together while supporting the heavens themselves. Solomon built this 12 bullocks representing the 12 constellational signs underneath the molten vessel. Go back and study it. Just so you'll understand how easy it is to get perverted and manipulated and accept things mistranslated, this very word musak, which indicates something compressed and pressed together, we have a cognate of it in the English word called music. It comes from a Greek derivative, and I know I'll hear from my buddy in Ohio. How would I say that, Brittany? Musike, which indicates the art of the Muses, the 9 goddesses who presided over all arts and science, principally music. From our previous teachings, we've concluded that this molten vessel that Solomon built, it had 12 oxen underneath it, and it was a literal representation of the stellar luminaries. And it's interesting that this vessel is patterned after the seas. And there are several other texts, Psalm 72:8, Zechariah 9:10, that all support the idea of seas surrounding the earth. There are numerous extra biblical works that say the same. I have them for you there. And so as we continue looking at the word yom and yam, the ancient root seems to relate it to the direction of east. Remember, south is the direction that is the direction of your right hand when you're facing east. Therefore, east or chedim always pointed to what was behind us. And so it seems then that yom would have the connotation of a future destination, future knowledge. In fact, all ancient schools of thought, their cultures without fail believed that waters, yam, seas, in their various forms was related to instruction and teaching. How noteworthy that the Hebrew word for Torah comes from the same root, yareh, as rain, the waters from heavens. Now brace yourself. I've got a few more minutes. If we look at the creation account found in Genesis 1, it seems that the earth was literally at one time enveloped in a body of water. This body was separated by a firmament in Genesis 1, 6 through 10. This firmament was called heaven. The word firmament here is the word rakia, the visible arch of the sky. Now, if you look at that word rakia, you have 2 roots that I want you to focus on, resh kuf, kuf ayin. The former, resh kuf, indicates to extenuate something or to mitigate it, to draw it forth, to empty out, to lower the viscosity or denseness of something. I'll give you a crude analogy. I was having sinus issues, terrible thick viscosity. So I took some herbal remedies to thin the viscosity out in order to draw it forth, to empty it out, to lower the denseness of it. You got that? The latter, the kuf ayin, indicates to impress something with a mark, to press a mark down into it. And so it seems that this firmament represents a body of waters between the stellar luminaries, and its purpose was to mitigate the intensity of their light while also drawing forth, in other words, enabling the light and its message to better be seen, received, and understood upon the earth. The value of rakia is 380. Firmament, 380 is the value of the word mishpar, from whence we get the word safar, to cipher, to count, to tell. Abraham was told to go and safar the stars. Look at the rakia there, because the rakia is going to magnify, make plain, enable you to see and understand. So is there a connection between see and sound? First, let me state that I'm convinced that sound is light slowed down. In addition, I want to remind you that man's physiological makeup is on average 60% water, while your blood, which I believe is congealed light, is comprised of over 90% water. Did you know that sound travels 4 times faster in water than in air? Did you know that all babies from conception are enclosed in a water sac until they're born? Isn't that interesting? Think about this carefully. I have taught on numerous occasions that I believe that the earth was originally laid out in the form of a man. If that was the case, and Yahweh forms the man in the womb of a woman encapsulated inside a water sack, is it possible that the earth, representing the form of the man, would have been encapsulated inside of an amniotic sac or fluid called the seas? And is it possible that we're going to see that same amniotic fluid sac restored to the earth until man is born again? Yeshua said, you must be born again. And I'm just going to tell you something. Yahweh could have done away with you and recreated another man. But he gave us an opportunity through the blood cleansing agent of our Messiah, Yeshua, to be quote unquote born again. But as long as we're in this fleshly body, we're only spiritually born. We will never be born again in this carnal fleshly body. We're going to have a vessel change. And is it possible that simultaneously with this changing, this renovation that we've been looking at and studying, that's going to be seasoned when all of sin and death will be eradicated on this earth, and man as a whole will have a complete, contiguous, glorified body just like the land mass in the earth, and it will no longer be humbled. We will in fact be the born again sons of the Most High, sons of the living Elohim like we were intended to be. I have a hard time with that. I just don't see how it could relate. Did you know that the waves of the sea literally rotate in a 360-degree circle? Did you know that the waves exhibit frequencies determined by the number of waves per second? A full wave motion from one crest to the next can be measured by pi, 3.14. And did you also know that they present an everlasting, ever-present witness attesting to a 360-day calendar depicted in the heavens? And isn't it interesting that you can remember Yeshua walking upon the waters of the Sea of Galilee? Galilee meaning circle or circuit. And in that particular event, he clearly fulfills his role as the sun in its circuit through the heavens. In addition to that, the rabbis note that Daniel chapter 5, go back and look at these verses. I don't have time to get into it today. Daniel chapter 12, 5 and 6 indicate that if and when a future Messiah comes, he must in fact walk upon the waters. Yeshua fulfilled that. And in closing with him walking upon the waters, it also dovetails all the way back to our account in Genesis regarding the flood, because the ark walked upon the waters. All you have to do is go back and look. It says where the ark went, yalak, which means to walk, indicating that the pattern of the ark, first described in the eternal heavens, was demonstrated in the life of our Messiah, that it would be revealed, displayed, and understood, and he would become conversant in his goings upon it. When you halak together, you become one ekad, you're conversant with one another, you become familiar, acquainted, and it reveals. It reveals your life, your religion, if you will. Halak is a journey with a destination. The seas around this earth reveal that appointment from the beginning of creation. And it's interesting because the word halak has the same value as the phrase the garden, Hagan, and Ha-Adamah. If you look at halak, hey, lamed, kaf, hey indicates look, behold, while lamed indicates to reach out, to bind something together, and to teach. When you see someone walking upon, it's indicating that he is born by. We fixate on the fact that it was Yeshua walking upon the waters, but we have lost sight of the fact that he was being born by the waters. Not birthed, carried by the waters. The waters were charged with the sole responsibility, the sole duty of carrying the Messiah and his message. It was an eternal responsibility given to them to reveal Messiah, and their duty, the water's duty, was to uphold and sustain, to lend credence to his role as Redeemer husband who must appear at set times for his bride. So I have a question for you. These waters have to be returned to their place. So could the eternal responsibility assigned to the Creation Covenant Calendar of 360 days, written in the stellar heavens and depicted on the earth here, could they ever be supplanted? I'll leave that for you to make a decision. Hope you've enjoyed this teaching. Shalom Aleichem.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Pastor Dave.